The anguished wail of a debt collector's threats echoed through the thin walls of Eleanor Evans' childhood home, drowning out the sound of her mother's desperate bargaining. At 18, Eleanor never imagined that her life's value could be measured in dollars and cents. But on that bitter spring morning in 1876, she discovered just how quickly a mother's love could be sold to the highest bidder. $50 ain't enough for what you owe me, Margaret, barked Samuel Hollister, the most feared moneylender in Victor, Colorado. His weathered face, mapped with deep lines from years of squinting beneath the western sun, contorted with impatience. I've been more than generous with extensions. Eleanor pressed her back against the hallway wall, her heart hammering against her ribs. She'd known they were struggling since Pa died in the silver mine collapse 3 years prior, but she hadn't realized how dire their circumstances had become. Her mother's voice, once strong and assured, now wavered like a dying flame. Please, Mr. Hollister, we just need more time. The boarding house is finally starting to turn a profit, and I've heard those promises before, he cut in. $120 by week's end, or you'll lose everything. Eleanor's mother fell silent, and when she spoke again, her voice was barely audible. What about? What about Eleanor? The floorboard creaked beneath Eleanor's foot as she inadvertently stepped forward, betraying her presence. Both adults turned, Hollister's eyes gleaming with newfound interest as they landed on Eleanor. With her chestnut hair falling in loose waves past her shoulders and her father's emerald eyes, Eleanor had grown into a beauty that hadn't gone unnoticed in their small mining town. Your girl, Hollister stroked his chin thoughtfully. She'd fetch a good price at Madame Roux's establishment in Denver. Eleanor's blood ran cold. Madame Roux's was notorious throughout the territory, a high-class brothel catering to wealthy businessmen and politicians. No. Eleanor stepped into the room, her voice stronger than she felt. Mother, you cannot possibly be considering this. Margaret Evans wouldn't meet her daughter's gaze. There are no other options, Eleanor. We're out of time. $100 for the girl, Hollister proposed casually, as if discussing the price of cattle. That would settle most of your debt, and I'd give you an extra month on the remainder. Before Eleanor could protest further, the front door swung open with a bang. Framed in the doorway stood a man Eleanor had glimpsed only a few times around town, tall and broad-shouldered, with a Stetson pulled low over his eyes and a revolver holstered at his hip. Thomas Vance, they called him. A cattle rancher who owned land north of town, known for keeping to himself and handling his affairs with quiet efficiency. I heard there was some trouble here, he said, his deep voice filling the small parlor. His gaze swept over the scene before settling on Hollister. Selling women to pay debts, Sam. Even for you, that's low. Hollister's face flushed. This is a private business matter, Vance. Best you move along. Thomas Vance stepped fully into the room, removing his hat to reveal hair the color of sun-bleached wheat and eyes as blue as a summer sky. I'm making it my business. He turned to Margaret. How much do you owe? $120, she admitted, shame coloring her voice. Without hesitation, Vance reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a leather wallet. $240, he said, counting out bills and placing them on the table between them. Double what's owed to end this matter entirely. Eleanor gasped. Such a sum was a small fortune in Victor. Hollister's eyes widened, greed overtaking his surprise. Well, now that changes things. He snatched up the money, counting it quickly. The Evans women are in your hands now, Vance. No, Thomas corrected firmly. The debt is paid. They don't owe anyone anything now, not you, not me. He turned to Eleanor, his expression softening slightly. No strings attached, Miss Evans. You're not property to be bought or sold. Hollister stuffed the money into his pocket and tipped his hat mockingly. Always the hero, Vance? Well, it's your money to waste. He stalked out, leaving an uncomfortable silence in his wake. Margaret collapsed into a chair, her face buried in her hands. "What have I done?" she whispered. "What kind of mother even considers such a thing?" Eleanor stood frozen, unable to process the rapid shift in her circumstances. One moment, her future had been bartered away. The next, this stranger had secured her freedom at considerable expense. "Why?" she finally managed to ask Thomas. "Why would you do this for people you barely know?" His gaze, when it met hers, held no expectation, no ulterior motive she could discern. "My mother faced similar choices once. She didn't have anyone step in." He placed his hat back on his head and moved toward the door. "The debt's cleared. What you do with your freedom is your choice, Miss Evans." "Wait," Eleanor called as he reached the threshold. "How will I ever repay you?" Thomas paused but didn't turn around. "You don't owe me anything, but if you're looking for honest work, I could use help at my ranch housekeeper position." He glanced back, his expression unreadable. "Think about it." "Vance Ranch, 5 miles north." "Good day, ladies." The door closed behind him, leaving Eleanor standing in the middle of the parlor, her world irrevocably changed. "Mother, how could you?" Eleanor finally broke the silence, her voice trembling with disbelief. Margaret raised tear-filled eyes. "I was desperate, Eleanor, after your father died. The debts just kept mounting. I thought I could manage the boarding house alone, but," she shook her head, "it's no excuse. I failed you terribly." Eleanor's anger warred with pity at the sight of her mother's genuine remorse. "You would have sold me to a brothel." "I wasn't thinking clearly," Margaret whispered. "Thank God that man intervened." Eleanor turned to the window, watching Thomas Vance's figure recede down the dusty Main Street. She'd heard whispers about him in town, a widower who kept to himself, ran one of the more successful cattle operations in the county, and was known for fair dealings. Beyond that, he was a mystery. "I'm going to take that job," Eleanor announced suddenly. "What?" "You can't possibly go to work for a strange man out in the middle of nowhere." Eleanor turned back to her mother, her decision crystallizing with every heartbeat. "You've lost the right to tell me what I can and cannot do. Besides, I need work and we still have to eat." She crossed her arms. "Would you rather I ask for a position at the Silver Dollar Saloon?" "I hear they are always looking for new girls." Margaret blanched. "That's not the same thing." "Isn't it?" Eleanor challenged. "You were willing to sell me to Madame Rouge. How is that different?" Her mother had no answer for that. "I'll start packing my things," Eleanor continued, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions raging inside her. "I'll send money home when I can." "Eleanor, please, I need time, Mother. Time away from here, from you." The words hurt to say, but they were necessary. "Mr. Vance offered me a respectable position, and I'm going to take it." The next morning dawned clear and crisp, the spring air carrying the scent of pine from the mountains surrounding Victor. Eleanor packed her meager belongings into a carpet bag, 2 dresses, undergarments, her mother's silver hairbrush, and the leather-bound journal her father had given her for her 16th birthday. The stage to the North County wouldn't depart until noon, which left her with one more task. Eleanor found Sheriff James Miller at his desk, nursing a cup of coffee while reviewing wanted posters. "Miss Evans," he greeted her, standing politely. "What brings you to my office so early?" "I wanted to ask about Thomas Vance," she said directly. "What do you know of his character?" The sheriff's bushy eyebrows rose in surprise. "Tom Vance? Well now, he's about as solid as they come. Moved here about 5 years back, bought the old Peterson place after it had gone to seed. Turned it into one of the finest cattle operations in the county through nothing but hard work." He studied her curiously. "Why do you ask?" Eleanor explained briefly about the offer of employment, omitting the more shameful details of her mother's actions. Sheriff Miller nodded thoughtfully. Can't think of a safer place for a young lady to work. Vance runs a respectable operation. Keeps to himself mostly, but he's fair to his men and pays on time. He leaned forward. Lost his wife and child in childbirth before coming here. Some say that's why he's so solitary. But I've never known him to raise his voice, let alone his hand, to anyone who didn't deserve it. This information provided Eleanor with some comfort. Thank you, Sheriff. You planning to take the position, then? I am, he nodded approvingly. Your pa was a good man, Eleanor. He'd want you to make your own way honorably. I think he'd approve of Vance. The mention of her father brought unexpected tears to Eleanor's eyes. I hope so, she whispered. The journey to Vance Ranch took less than an hour by stagecoach. When Eleanor disembarked at the crossroads, she found herself standing before a long dirt road that wound through rolling grasslands toward a cluster of buildings nestled against a backdrop of ponderosa pines. Taking a deep breath, she gathered her carpetbag and began walking. As she approached, details came into focus. The main house was larger than she'd expected, a two-story structure built of sturdy logs with a wraparound porch. Several outbuildings dotted the property, including a barn, bunkhouse, and what appeared to be a smithy. Men moved about their tasks with purpose, and the lowing of cattle carried from distant pastures. A dark-haired man in his 30s noticed her first, setting down a stack of wooden posts to approach. "Can I help you, miss?" "I'm Eleanor Evans," she said, summoning her courage. Mr. Vance offered me the housekeeper position. Recognition flashed across his features. "Ah, yes. I'm Daniel Cooper, the foreman. We've been expecting you." He gestured toward the main house. "Mr. Vance is out checking the north pasture, but he should return shortly." "Let me show you to the house." Eleanor followed him up the path, conscious of curious glances from the other ranch hands. The isolation of the place struck her suddenly. She'd never lived outside of town before, and the vastness of the open country surrounding the ranch was both exhilarating and intimidating. The interior of the house was surprisingly well appointed, if somewhat austere. Polished wooden floors, practical furniture, and clean surfaces spoke of care, but there were few personal touches, no photographs, decorative items, or feminine influences. "Mrs. Wilkins used to keep house," Daniel explained as he showed her through the rooms. "But her arthritis got too bad last winter, and she moved to Denver to live with her daughter. The boss has been making do with the cook coming in from the bunkhouse to tidy up, but it's not the same." "I see," Eleanor said, noting the layer of dust on the mantelpiece and the general sense of a home that was merely functional rather than lived in. "When will Mr. Vance return?" "Should be before supper," Daniel replied. "Your room's upstairs, last door on the left. It has its own entrance from the back staircase, so you'll have your privacy." He pointed out the kitchen, pantry, and study on the main floor. "The boss's room is upstairs too, other end of the hall from yours." Eleanor nodded, grateful for the consideration of her reputation. Working as a single woman in a bachelor's household was precarious enough without sharing close quarters. "Thank you, Mr. Cooper." "Just Daniel, miss. We're not much for formality here." He tipped his hat. "I'll let the boss know you've arrived when he gets back." Left alone, Eleanor carried her bag upstairs to her new quarters. The room was simple but comfortable, a narrow bed with a patchwork quilt, a dresser, washstand, and a small writing desk beneath a window that overlooked the eastern pastures. She unpacked her few belongings and then, determined to begin earning her keep immediately, rolled up her sleeves and set to work on the dust-covered surfaces downstairs. By late afternoon, she had swept the main floor, polished the banister, and was in the midst of organizing the kitchen when the back door opened. Thomas Vance filled the doorway, appearing even taller than she remembered. His blue eyes registered surprise at finding her there. "Miss Evans," he said, removing his hat. "You accepted the position." "I did," she replied, wiping her hands on the apron she'd found hanging in the pantry. "I hope that's still agreeable to you." He nodded once, his expression giving little away. "The terms are $15 a month, room and board included. Sundays are yours to do as you please. If that suits you, we can shake on it." The salary was generous, nearly double what she might have earned at the millinery shop in town. Eleanor extended her hand. "It suits me well, Mr. Vance." His large hand engulfed hers, calloused but gentle in its grip. "Tom," he corrected, "if we're to share a roof, no need for formalities between us. Then you must call me Eleanor." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Eleanor," he agreed, releasing her hand. "Have you settled in?" "Yes, thank you. Your foreman was very helpful. Daniel's a good man." He glanced around the kitchen, noting the progress she'd made. "You didn't need to start work immediately." "I prefer to keep busy," she said simply. Tom studied her for a moment longer than was comfortable, as if trying to read something in her face. "Supper's at 6 in the bunkhouse. Cookie, that's what we call our cook, feeds the men first, then brings plates to the house. Unless you'd prefer to dine with the crew." Eleanor hesitated, uncertain of the protocol. "Whatever is customary." "Previous housekeeper took her meals here," he said. "More peaceful than listening to 15 cowhands arguing about politics and telling tall tales." "Here it is, then," she agreed, relieved. Tom nodded, seeming to have exhausted his store of conversation. "I'll be in the barn if you need anything." After he left, Eleanor leaned against the countertop, releasing a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. There was something intimidating about Thomas Vance, not in a threatening way, but in his quiet intensity and economy of words. He clearly wasn't accustomed to making small talk or explaining himself. At precisely 6 o'clock, a stout, gray-haired man with a weathered face and twinkling eyes arrived carrying a tray laden with covered dishes. "Welcome to Vance Ranch, Miss Evans," he boomed cheerfully. "Caleb Whitney, cook and keeper of these hungry wolves. You can call me Cookie like everyone else." He set the tray on the table with a flourish. "Made something special for your first night: roast beef, potatoes, and my famous sourdough rolls." His friendly manner was a welcome contrast to Tom's reserved demeanor. "It smells wonderful, Cookie. Thank you." "Boss joining you?" he asked, glancing toward the doorway. "I'm not sure. He didn't say." Cookie nodded knowingly. "Man of few words, our Tom, but a good boss, fair and decent." He winked. "Just holler if you need anything else." As if summoned by their conversation, Tom appeared in the doorway, his tall frame filling the space. He'd washed up, his wheat-colored hair still damp at the temples, and changed into a clean shirt. "Cookie," he acknowledged. "Smells good." "Only my best for the new housekeeper," Cookie replied with a grin. "Can't have her running back to town claiming we feed her slop out here." A hint of amusement softened Tom's features. "No one's ever accused you of serving slop, old man." "And they never will," Cookie declared, backing toward the door. "Enjoy, folks. Apple pie for dessert, I'll bring it up later." When they were alone, an awkward silence descended. Eleanor waited for Tom to take his seat at the head of the table before sitting to his right. "I hope you don't mind dining with me," he said as he unfolded his napkin. "If you'd prefer privacy, not at all," she assured him quickly. "It's your home, after all." He served her first, then himself, his movements precise and practiced. They ate in silence for several minutes before Eleanor gathered her courage to speak. "I wanted to thank you properly," she said, "for what you did yesterday." Tom's fork paused midway to his mouth. "No thanks necessary. $240 is a considerable sum," she persisted. Why would you part with so much money for strangers? He set his fork down, considering his words carefully. I don't abide by men like Hollister, vultures circling when folks are at their lowest. His gaze met hers directly. And I don't abide by women being treated as commodities. The intensity in his eyes made Eleanor look away first. Still, I'm grateful. Your mother, he said after a pause. She must have been desperate to consider Hollister's proposal. Eleanor's hands clenched in her lap. That's no excuse. No, he agreed. It isn't. But desperation makes people do things they'd never imagine otherwise. Is that why you offered me this position? Pity. Tom's expression hardened slightly. I don't operate on pity, Eleanor. The house needed tending and you needed honest work. Simple as that. She nodded, chastened by his directness. I appreciate the opportunity. What skills do you have? He asked, changing the subject. Besides housekeeping. I can read and write well. My father insisted on education for me, even though many thought it unnecessary for a girl. I keep good accounts. I can sew anything from clothing to quilts, and I'm a fair cook, though probably not up to Cookie's standards. She smiled slightly. And I can ride, though it's been some time. All useful abilities on a ranch, he observed. The reading and writing especially. I've been meaning to organize the ledgers and correspondence, but haven't found the time. I'd be happy to help with that, she offered. Tom nodded, seeming pleased with her response. We'll see about getting you a horse, too. Not practical for you to be stranded here without transportation. The conversation flowed more easily after that, revolving around the practical aspects of ranch life and her duties. Though Tom never became verbose, his initial reserve thawed somewhat as the meal progressed. By the time Cookie returned with the promised apple pie, Eleanor felt marginally more at ease in her new employer's presence. Later that night, as she prepared for bed in her new room, Eleanor tried to make sense of her dramatically altered circumstances. Just 24 hours earlier, she'd been the daughter of a struggling widow, living in the same house where she'd been born. Now she was employed as housekeeper to a man she barely knew, miles from town, having barely spoken to her mother before departing. The weight of her mother's betrayal still sat heavily on her chest. How could the woman who had nursed her through childhood fevers, who had taught her to read and sew, who had wept with her at her father's funeral, have been willing to sell her to settle a debt? The wound was too fresh, the betrayal too profound to process fully. And then there was Thomas Vance, an enigma who had swept in like some character from a dime novel, only to reveal himself as a quiet, reserved man with watchful eyes and few words. His generosity made no sense by any practical measure, yet Sheriff Miller had vouched for his character. Perhaps, Eleanor thought as she drifted toward sleep, there were still good men left in this harsh territory after all. The coming days would test that theory and her own resilience in ways she could not yet imagine. Dawn broke early at Vance Ranch, the first golden rays of sunlight streaming through Eleanor's window and rousing her from sleep. For a disorienting moment, she couldn't place her surroundings, but then the events of the previous day rushed back. This was her new home, at least for now. She dressed quickly in her plain blue work dress and twisted her hair into a practical bun. By the time she descended to the kitchen, she found Cookie already there, whistling as he stoked the wood stove. "Morning, Miss Evans," he greeted cheerfully. "Early riser, eh? Good. Ranch folk can't afford to sleep past sunrise." He poured her a cup of coffee from the pot already bubbling on the stove. "Boss is already out with the men. Spring roundup starting, so they're bringing in cattle from the far pastures." "What time will they return?" Eleanor asked, accepting the coffee gratefully. "Depends on how the work goes. Could be sunset, could be sooner." He began cracking eggs into a large bowl. I'll bring lunch up for you around midday. Meantime, boss left a note for you on his desk in the study." After a hearty breakfast of scrambled eggs, bacon, and biscuits, Eleanor made her way to the study. It was a masculine room, with a large oak desk, bookshelves lining one wall, and a comfortable leather chair beside the stone fireplace. A rifle rack hung above the mantel, and maps of the surrounding territory were spread across one table. Tom's note was brief and to the point. "Eleanor, feel free to arrange the house as you see fit. Account books in the bottom drawer need organizing. Back by supper." Vance, succinct and practical, much like the man himself. Eleanor tucked the note into her pocket and set to work. She spent the morning giving the house a thorough cleaning, opening windows to let in the fresh spring air, and discovering the layout of the large dwelling. In addition to the rooms she'd already seen, there was a formal dining room that appeared rarely used, a small library adjacent to the study, and several unused bedrooms upstairs. One room, however, gave her pause. Located at the end of the upstairs hall, its door was closed but not locked. When Eleanor entered, she found what was clearly a nursery, preserved as if awaiting an occupant, a handcrafted cradle, a rocking chair with a faded cushion, a small dresser with tiny garments still folded inside. A fine layer of dust covered everything, suggesting no one had disturbed this room in years. The sheriff's words echoed in her mind. Lost his wife and child in childbirth before coming here. Eleanor backed out quietly, closing the door behind her. Some spaces weren't hers to clean or disturb, no matter her role in the household. The existence of that preserved nursery spoke volumes about the man who employed her, a grief too deep to pack away, too precious to erase. After lunch, Eleanor turned her attention to the account books. Tom's record-keeping was methodical but needed organization. She sorted through receipts, bills of sale, and wage records, creating a more efficient system as she worked. The ranch was clearly prosperous. Cattle sales from the previous year alone had brought in substantial income, and Tom had made several land purchases to expand his holdings. By late afternoon, Eleanor had a much clearer picture of Vance Ranch's operations. Tom ran a tight ship financially, paid his men well above the going rate, and seemed to have no debts, a rarity in the boom and bust economy of Colorado Territory. The sun was setting when she heard the men returning, their voices carrying from the yard as they led their horses to the barn. Eleanor put on a fresh pot of coffee and checked on the stew Cookie had left simmering on the back of the stove. Soon after, Tom's heavy footsteps sounded on the porch. He entered, removing his hat and duster, looking weary but satisfied. "Evening," he greeted her. "House looks good." "Thank you," Eleanor replied, pouring him a cup of coffee. "Productive day. Brought in 50 head from the North Range. Good condition despite the hard winter." He accepted the coffee with a nod of thanks. "Did you find everything you needed?" "Yes, the house was well stocked." She hesitated. "I organized your account books as requested. Hope the new system meets with your approval." Tom raised an eyebrow. "Already? Didn't expect you'd get to that so quickly." "I work efficiently," she said with a small smile. "So I see." He sipped his coffee, studying her over the rim of the cup. "Previous housekeeper took 3 days just to dust the place properly. Mrs. Wilkins was older, I understand, and I had motivation to prove my worth quickly." Understanding flickered in his eyes. "You have nothing to prove, Eleanor. The job is yours for as long as you want it." The simple assurance eased a tension she hadn't realized she was carrying. In her experience, security was a fragile thing. Her family's descent from comfortable middle class to desperate poverty after her father's death had taught her that lesson well. "Thank you," she said simply. Cookie arrived with fresh bread and a pie to accompany the stew. and they settled into their second dinner together with considerably less awkwardness than the first. Tom, though still not talkative, was more forthcoming about the ranch's operations and his plans for the coming season. "We'll be driving 100 head to Denver next month," he explained between bites. "Better prices there than selling to the local buyers." "That sounds like a significant undertaking," he nodded. "Takes about a week, depending on weather and trail conditions. Daniel will lead the drive. I'll stay behind to manage things here." "How many men work for you?" Eleanor asked, genuinely interested in understanding the operation better. 15 regular hands plus Cookie. Hire extra during roundup and the fall drive." He paused, seeming to deliberate before continuing. 4 of my men are former slaves who came west after the war. 2 are Mexican. 1's Ute Indian. Does that trouble you?" The question caught her off guard. "Why would it?" "Some folks have strong opinions about who's fit to work alongside whites." "My father taught me to judge people by their character, not their color or background," Eleanor replied firmly. "If you trust them, that's good enough for me." Something like approval flickered across Tom's face. "Your father sounds like a wise man." "He was," she said softly. "He was also stubborn and sometimes too principled for his own good. The mine owners offered safer positions, but he insisted on working alongside the men he supervised rather than accepting special treatment. That accident claimed 7 lives, if I recall correctly." Eleanor nodded, swallowing the familiar knot of grief that arose whenever she discussed her father's death. 7 men, leaving 5 widows and 13 children behind. The mining company provided a paltry settlement that barely lasted 6 months for most families. "And your mother tried to keep the boarding house going alone," Tom surmised. "Yes. She took in washing, sewing, whatever work she could find." Eleanor's voice hardened slightly, "but it doesn't excuse what she was willing to do." Tom was quiet for a long moment. "No, it doesn't," he finally agreed. "But I've seen what desperation does to people. Sometimes the choices aren't between right and wrong, but between different kinds of wrong." His insight surprised her. Most men in Eleanor's experience were quick to judge women's moral failings while excusing their own. Tom's more nuanced view wasn't what she expected from a solitary rancher. "You speak from experience," she observed. He met her gaze directly. "Everyone in these territories has faced hard choices, Eleanor. Anyone who claims otherwise is either lying or hasn't lived long enough yet." The conversation shifted to lighter topics after that, but Eleanor found herself increasingly intrigued by her employer. Thomas Vance was not the simple cattleman she had initially assumed. There were depths to him that belied his quiet exterior and sparse conversation. As the days passed, Eleanor settled into a routine at Vance Ranch. Each morning she rose with the sun, prepared the house for the day, and tackled whatever projects needed attention. Tom was often gone from dawn until dusk, working alongside his men despite his position as owner. When he returned in the evenings, they would share supper and conversation that grew incrementally more comfortable as they became accustomed to each other's company. On her first Sunday at the ranch, Eleanor faced the prospect of a full day to herself with uncertainty. In town, she would have attended church services and perhaps visited with friends afterward. Here, she was 5 miles from the nearest neighbor and even farther from town. She was sitting on the front porch with her journal when Tom approached from the direction of the barn, leading 2 saddled horses, his own chestnut gelding, and a dappled gray mare. "Thought you might like to see more of the ranch," he said in response to her questioning look. "You mentioned you can ride." Eleanor set aside her journal, unable to hide her enthusiasm. "I'd love to. Let me change into something more suitable." She hurried upstairs and changed into her one riding skirt, a practical divided garment her father had insisted she have for the occasional family outings they'd enjoyed when he was alive. When she returned to the porch, Tom's eyes widened slightly in approval. "The gray's gentle but spirited," he said as he helped her mount. "Her name's Willow." The mare responded well to Eleanor's touch, and soon they were riding side by side across the rolling grasslands that comprised the heart of Vance Ranch. Tom proved to be a knowledgeable guide, pointing out landmarks and sharing the history of the property. "Previous owner let it go to ruin," he explained as they crested a hill overlooking a verdant valley. "Land was good, but the buildings were falling down, fences broken, cattle scattered. Took almost 2 years to get it running properly." "It's beautiful," Eleanor said sincerely, taking in the panoramic view. The spring grass was vibrant green, dotted with wildflowers, and a stream wound through the valley below. In the distance, the Rocky Mountains provided a majestic backdrop, their peaks still capped with snow. "This is my favorite spot on the property," Tom admitted, his usual reserve softening as he gazed out over his domain. "When I first saw it, I knew this was where I wanted to build my future." "You've accomplished a great deal in 5 years." He nodded, a hint of pride in his expression. "Still more to do. Planning to add sheep next year despite what the cattle purists might say. Wool fetches good prices, and they can graze land that's too rough for cattle." They rode for over 2 hours, circling back toward the ranch house as the midday sun grew warmer. Eleanor found herself genuinely enjoying Tom's company. Away from the confines of the house, he was more relaxed, sharing occasional stories about the ranch's development and his plans for its future. "You have a good seat," he observed as they approached the barn. "Not many ladies ride so confidently." "My father believed girls should learn practical skills," Eleanor explained. "He said you never know when you might need to rely on yourself." "Wise man," Tom repeated his earlier assessment. "He'd be proud of how you're handling things." The simple comment touched her deeply. "Thank you." That afternoon, as Eleanor rested on her bed with a book borrowed from Tom's library, she found her thoughts returning repeatedly to their morning ride. There was something compelling about Thomas Vance, not just his physical presence, which was undeniably impressive, but the integrity she sensed in him. He was a man who kept his word, who treated those around him with respect, who had built something substantial through honest labor. It was a stark contrast to her mother's desperate compromise and Hollister's predatory opportunism. In the week since leaving Victor, Eleanor had received one letter from her mother, a tearful apology that she had set aside, unable yet to formulate a response. The wound was still too fresh, the betrayal too profound to easily forgive, yet Tom's perspective lingered in her mind. Sometimes the choices aren't between right and wrong, but between different kinds of wrong. Was there wisdom there she was too hurt to recognize? The following weeks brought an increase in activity at the ranch, as spring roundup continued and preparations for the cattle drive to Denver intensified. Eleanor found herself busier than ever, not just with household duties, but increasingly with ranch business as well. Tom discovered her skill with numbers and correspondence and began relying on her to handle more of the paperwork that he clearly disliked. "You have a head for business," he commented one evening as they reviewed the books together. "Better than mine, truth be told." "I enjoy it," she admitted. "My father always included me in discussions about household finances. He believed women should understand money matters." "Another way he was ahead of his time," Tom observed. His fingers brushed against hers as he turned a page in the ledger, and Eleanor felt an unexpected flutter in her chest at the brief contact. She withdrew her hand quickly, confused by her reaction. If Tom noticed her discomfort, he gave no sign. "I've been thinking about expanding the apple orchard behind the house. Good market for fruit, and it would diversify our income." "That seems sensible," Eleanor agreed, grateful for the change in subject. "The trees I saw are healthy but few in number." "They were my wife's project," he said quietly, the first direct mention he had made of his late wife. "Abigail loved apples, said every proper home should have an orchard." Eleanor hesitated, uncertain whether to acknowledge this personal revelation or let it pass. "She had good taste," she finally said, "both in fruit trees and in property. This is a beautiful ranch." Tom's eyes met hers, something unreadable in their blue depths. "Yes," he said simply. "She did." The moment stretched between them, charged with an emotion Eleanor couldn't quite identify. Then Tom cleared his throat and returned his attention to the ledger, the brief window into his past closing as quickly as it had opened. That night, Eleanor lay awake longer than usual, thinking about the glimpses she'd caught of the man beneath Thomas Vance's reserved exterior. The grief he still carried for his wife and child. The principles that had led him to pay off a stranger's debt with no expectation of return. The fair-minded way he ran his ranch, judging men by their work rather than their background. And most disturbing of all, the increasing awareness that her feelings toward him were shifting from gratitude and respect to something more complicated, an attraction she had no right to feel and certainly shouldn't act upon. He was her employer, her benefactor. Whatever her emerging feelings might be, professionalism demanded she keep them strictly to herself. With the arrival of May came preparations for the cattle drive to Denver. The ranch buzzed with activity as the selected herd was gathered, supplies prepared, and final arrangements made. Daniel, the foreman, would lead the drive with 10 of the hands, leaving Tom, Cookie, and 4 others to manage the ranch in their absence. "They'll be gone at least 2 weeks," Tom explained to Eleanor the night before the drive was to begin. "Longer if the weather turns bad or they encounter problems on the trail." "Is it dangerous?" she asked, realizing how much the ranch's routine had become her own in just a few short weeks. "Can be," he admitted. "Stampedes, river crossings, thieves. But Daniel knows what he's doing and the men are experienced." He hesitated, then added, "I'd normally go myself, but—" "But what?" Eleanor prompted when he didn't continue. Tom's gaze was direct. "Don't entirely trust Hollister not to come sniffing around while I'm gone. Man like that doesn't forget being shown up." The implication that he was staying behind partly to ensure her safety sent an unexpected warmth through Eleanor. "Surely he wouldn't come all the way out here." "Probably not," Tom conceded, "but I sleep better knowing I'm here just in case." The cattle drive departed at dawn the next day, the bellowing of the herd and the shouts of the cowboys creating a cacophony that gradually faded as they moved eastward. The ranch seemed oddly quiet afterward, with half the men gone and the usual bustle of activity diminished. 3 days later, the spring weather turned capricious. Dark clouds rolled in from the mountains, bringing driving rain that quickly turned to sleet as the temperature dropped. By evening, a full-fledged storm was raging, wind howling around the eaves of the house and rattling the windows in their frames. "Bad night to be out," Tom observed grimly as he built up the fire in the study. He'd spent the day helping the remaining men secure the outbuildings and bring the horses into the barn, returning to the house soaked to the skin and chilled despite his heavy coat. Eleanor brought him a steaming cup of coffee laced with whiskey. The cattle drive. They should have reached the eastern foothills by now. Better weather there than here. He accepted the cup with a grateful nod. "This'll help drive out the chill." "You should change into dry clothes," she advised, concerned by the pallor of his face. You'll catch your death otherwise." Tom managed a wry smile, starting to sound like Cookie, always fussing. "Someone has to look after you if you won't look after yourself," she retorted, surprising herself with her boldness. His smile widened slightly. "Yes, madam." He stood, wincing as he straightened. "You're hurt," Eleanor observed sharply. "What happened?" "Nothing serious. Slipped in the mud helping Miguel with a frightened colt." He rolled his shoulder experimentally. "Just wrenched my shoulder a bit." "Sit," she commanded. "I'll fetch some of Cookie's liniment. It won't help if you catch pneumonia on top of an injury." When she returned with the pungent-smelling remedy, Tom had removed his sodden shirt and sat bare-chested before the fire, a blanket draped over his shoulders. Eleanor stopped short in the doorway, momentarily flustered by the unexpected sight. Though lean, his torso was powerfully built, honed by years of physical labor. A long scar ran across his left side, disappearing around his back, an old injury that had clearly been serious. "The liniment," she said, her voice sounding unnaturally high to her own ears as she approached. "Where exactly is the pain?" "Right shoulder," he indicated, seemingly unaware of her discomfort. "Hurts to raise my arm." Eleanor steeled herself and moved behind his chair. "This will sting," she warned as she poured some of the liniment into her palm and began to apply it to his shoulder. His skin was warm despite his chill, the muscles beneath her fingers solid and tense. "That helps," he murmured as she worked the remedy into the strained muscles. "You have a gentle touch." The intimacy of the moment was not lost on Eleanor. In town, being alone with a half-dressed man would have been scandalously improper. Here, miles from judgmental eyes, it seemed a natural extension of her caretaking role. Still, she was acutely aware of Tom as a man, his physical presence, the scent of him beneath the sharp smell of the liniment, the trust implicit in allowing her to tend his injury. "I think that should do it," she said, stepping back perhaps more quickly than necessary. "You should rest it as much as possible for a day or two." Tom turned to face her, his expression thoughtful. "Thank you, Eleanor." There was a warmth in his voice that hadn't been there before, an appreciation that went beyond simple gratitude for her assistance. "You're welcome," she replied, suddenly desperate to restore a sense of normality to their interaction. "I'll see about dinner. Cookie left a pot of chili that just needs heating." She retreated to the kitchen, her heart beating faster than the situation warranted. This growing attraction to Thomas Vance was becoming harder to ignore, especially in moments of unexpected intimacy like the one they had just shared. Eleanor busied herself with dinner preparations, trying to regain her composure. When Tom joined her in the kitchen 20 minutes later, he had changed into dry clothes and looked more like himself, though his movements were still careful due to his injured shoulder. "Storm's getting worse," he observed, glancing out the window at the driving sleet. "Might turn to snow before morning at this rate." "In May?" Eleanor asked in surprise. "Colorado weather," Tom said with a shrug. "Unpredictable at best. We've had blizzards as late as June in bad years." They ate dinner to the accompaniment of the storm's fury, the conversation turning to practical matters of ranch management and plans for the coming summer. By the time they finished, the temperature had dropped further, and Tom built up fires in both the kitchen stove and the study fireplace to keep the house warm through the night. "Best get some sleep," he advised as they parted at the foot of the stairs. "Tomorrow might be challenging if this keeps up." Eleanor nodded, suddenly reluctant to say goodnight. "Your shoulder will you be able to manage?" "I've had worse," he assured her with a slight smile. "But thank you for your concern." She ascended the stairs to her room, listening to his heavier tread behind her as he made his way to his own quarters at the opposite end of the hall. The storm continued to rage outside, rattling the windows and sending occasional drafts through the otherwise snug house. Eleanor added an extra quilt to her bed and fell asleep to the sound of sleet against the glass. Sometime in the darkest hour of night, she was awakened by a tremendous crash, followed by the sound of splintering wood. Disoriented, Eleanor sat up, listening intently. Another crash came, this one closer, accompanied by male voices shouting. Fear gripped her as she realized they were not the familiar voices of the ranch hands. Throwing on her robe, Eleanor opened her bedroom door cautiously. The hallway was dark, but she could hear movement downstairs, the sound of furniture being overturned, glass breaking. Suddenly, Tom's door opened and he emerged, a rifle in his hands and an expression of grim determination on his face. "Stay in your room," he whispered urgently when he saw her. "Lock the door. What's happening?" she asked, keeping her voice low. "Intruders, at least 3 from what I can hear." His expression was fierce in the dim light. "Do as I say, Eleanor. Lock your door and stay away from the window." Another crash from below decided her. Eleanor retreated into her room, turning the key in the lock as instructed. Heart pounding, she pressed her ear to the door, straining to hear what was happening. Tom's footsteps moved away down the hall, then the sound of his voice raised in warning. "That's far enough." "Next man takes a step gets a bullet," a harsh laugh answered him. "Well, well, if it ain't the high and mighty Thomas Vance. Not so mighty with half your men gone on that cattle drive, are you?" The voice was vaguely familiar, though Eleanor couldn't immediately place it. "Hollister," Tom's voice came clearly through the door. "Should have known you'd be too cowardly to come alone." Samuel Hollister. Eleanor's blood ran cold. The moneylender had indeed come looking for her, just as Tom had feared. "Where is she, Vance?" Hollister demanded. "The Evans girl." "She's coming with us." "Over my dead body," Tom replied, his voice deadly calm. "That can be arranged," Hollister threatened. 3 guns against your 1, even you can't like those odds." Eleanor's fear turned to terror. Tom was outnumbered, and with his injured shoulder, he was at an even greater disadvantage. She looked frantically around the room for anything that might help. Her gaze fell on the small derringer her father had given her for protection, tucked away in her dresser drawer. It held only 2 shots, but it was better than nothing. A gunshot rang out downstairs, followed by the sound of splintering wood. More shouting, then the unmistakable sound of a physical struggle, furniture crashing, grunts of effort, another gunshot. Eleanor couldn't stand it any longer. Tom was fighting for his life for her while she cowered in her room. Decision made. She retrieved the derringer and unlocked her door, slipping quietly into the hallway. The back stairs led down to the kitchen. If she could circle around, perhaps she could surprise Hollister and his men from behind. The element of surprise might be enough to turn the tide. Moving as silently as possible, Eleanor descended the back stairs. The kitchen was empty, but the sounds of struggle continued from the direction of the main parlor. She crept forward, the small pistol clutched tightly in her trembling hand. Through the partially open door, she could see Tom grappling with a burly man she didn't recognize. Hollister stood nearby, a revolver in his hand, while a third man lay motionless on the floor. One of Tom's bullets had found its mark. But Tom was clearly at a disadvantage, his injured shoulder hampering his movements as he fought. Eleanor's moment came when Hollister turned slightly away from her, his attention fixed on the fight. She pushed the door open wider and stepped into the room, raising the derringer. "Drop your weapon, Mr. Hollister," she commanded, her voice steadier than she felt. Hollister whirled in surprise, his eyes widening at the sight of her. Well, well, the merchandise decides to deliver herself." His expression turned calculating. "That little popgun doesn't frighten me, girl." "It should," Eleanor replied, trying to channel Tom's calm authority. At this distance, even I couldn't miss. The momentary distraction was all Tom needed. With a powerful surge, he slammed his opponent against the wall, then delivered a blow that sent the man crumpling to the floor. In the same fluid motion, he dove for his rifle, which had been knocked aside during the struggle. Hollister, realizing his advantage was lost, swung his revolver toward Tom. Without hesitation, Eleanor squeezed the trigger of her derringer. The small gun bucked in her hand, the report surprisingly loud in the confined space. Hollister cried out, clutching his arm as his revolver clattered to the floor. "You shot me," he exclaimed incredulously, blood seeping between his fingers where the bullet had grazed his upper arm. "Consider yourself lucky," Tom said grimly, now on his feet with rifle in hand. "I wouldn't have aimed to wound." The fight seemed to go out of Hollister as he looked from Tom's unwavering rifle to Eleanor's still raised derringer, which had one shot remaining. His remaining Confederate was unconscious, and the third lay dead or gravely wounded. "This isn't over, Vance," Hollister spat, but the threat sounded hollow even to Eleanor's ears. "It is for tonight," Tom countered. "And if you're smart, it's over for good. Next time I won't be so merciful." He gestured with the rifle. "Eleanor, there's rope in the kitchen drawer. Bring it here." She complied quickly, and Tom efficiently bound Hollister and his surviving companion. The third man, as Eleanor had feared, was dead, shot through the chest during the initial confrontation. "What now?" she asked, the reality of what had just occurred beginning to sink in. She had shot a man. A dead body lay on the parlor floor. The quiet ranch house had become a scene of violence and death. "Now I ride for the sheriff," Tom said, his expression grave. "First light as soon as this storm lets up enough to make it to town." He looked at her, concern evident in his face. "Are you all right?" Eleanor nodded, though she felt far from all right. "I couldn't stay upstairs while you were fighting for your life." "You saved me," he acknowledged quietly. "That was brave, Eleanor. Foolish, but brave." "I was terrified," she admitted. "Being brave doesn't mean not being afraid," Tom said, gently taking the derringer from her still trembling hand. "It means acting despite your fear." His fingers closed around hers briefly. "Thank you." They secured Hollister and his accomplice in the root cellar, which had a sturdy door that could be barred from the outside. The dead man they covered with a tarpaulin in the barn. By then, the first gray light of dawn was appearing, and the storm had subsided to a steady, cold rain. Tom saddled his horse despite his injured shoulder, prepared to make the ride to town for the sheriff. Before mounting, he turned to Eleanor, who stood in the shelter of the barn doorway. "Bar all the doors after I leave," he instructed. "Cookie and the others are still out checking fences after the storm. They may not be back until afternoon. Keep my rifle with you." "I will," she promised. He hesitated, then stepped closer to her. "Eleanor, what Hollister did tonight, coming here with guns, intending to take you by force, that's a hanging offense in this territory. Once the sheriff hears the full story, including what your mother tried to do, she'll face charges too," Eleanor finished for him, the realization dawning with a sick feeling in her stomach. Despite everything, she didn't wish to see her mother imprisoned or worse. Tom nodded gravely. "It's possible. Is that what you want?" Eleanor closed her eyes briefly, considering the implications. Her mother's betrayal still cut deep, but the thought of being responsible for sending her to prison, perhaps even to the gallows as an accomplice to attempted kidnapping and murder, was unbearable. "No," she finally said. "Whatever she did, I don't want that for her." "Then we'll need to be careful about how we tell this story to the sheriff," Tom said. "The truth about Hollister and his men, but perhaps not the whole truth about why they came." Eleanor looked up at him in surprise. "You would do that?" Withhold information from the law. Justice and the law aren't always the same thing, Tom replied simply. Your mother has suffered enough, losing her husband, nearly losing everything. Her attempt to sell you was despicable, but she's not in the same category as Hollister and his thugs. The compassion in his reasoning touched Eleanor deeply. This man, who had already shown her more kindness than she could repay, was now offering to protect her mother as well, a woman who had wronged them both. Thank you, she whispered, emotion making it difficult to say more. Tom's expression softened, and for a moment she thought he might embrace her. Instead, he placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Bar the doors, he repeated. I'll be back as soon as I can with the sheriff. Eleanor watched him ride away into the drizzling dawn, his tall figure soon lost in the misty landscape. Only when he was out of sight did she retreat to the house, securing every entrance as instructed. The events of the night left her shaken, but also strangely empowered. She had faced danger and not faltered. She had protected someone she cared about, just as he had protected her. The realization that she did indeed care for Thomas Vance, cared deeply, in fact, was no longer something she could deny to herself. Somewhere between gratitude and admiration, her feelings had transformed into something much more profound. Whether anything could come of those feelings remained to be seen, but the truth of them was undeniable. Eleanor spent the anxious hours of Tom's absence cleaning up the destruction left by the intruders. The parlor was in shambles, broken furniture, a shattered lamp, bloodstains on the rug where the dead man had fallen. She worked methodically, trying to restore order to the chaos, keeping the rifle close at hand as she moved through the house. By mid-morning, Cookie and two of the ranch hands returned, alarmed by the signs of violence they found. Eleanor explained what had happened, omitting only the original reason for Hollister's vendetta against her. Cookie insisted on checking on their prisoners, bringing them water but no comfort beyond that basic necessity. Varmints, he spat after securing the root cellar door again. Coming into a man's home in the dead of night. In my day, we wouldn't have bothered with no sheriff. It was nearly noon when Tom returned with Sheriff Miller and a deputy. The lawman took charge of Hollister and his surviving accomplice, loading the body of the dead man across a spare horse. Miss Evans, Sheriff Miller greeted her gravely. Mr. Vance has told me about last night's events. Terrible business. He tipped his hat respectfully. You showed remarkable courage by his account. I only did what was necessary, she replied, conscious of Tom watching her closely. Mr. Vance was greatly outnumbered. Well, these men will face justice, the sheriff assured her. Breaking and entering, attempted kidnapping, assault with deadly weapons, the charges are serious. You'll both need to come to town in the next few days to give formal statements. Of course, Eleanor agreed. As the sheriff had indicated, Tom had clearly given a version of events that omitted her mother's role in the original transaction with Hollister. For that, Eleanor was profoundly grateful. After the lawmen departed with their prisoners, an exhausted silence fell over the ranch house. Cookie prepared a late lunch that neither Eleanor nor Tom had much appetite for, then tactfully left them alone in the kitchen. Sheriff Miller is an old friend, Tom said after a while, breaking the silence. Known him since I first came to these parts. He'll see that Hollister gets what he deserves. Eleanor nodded, then asked the question that had been troubling her since the night before. Why did you stay? When the cattle drive left, you could have gone with them. It would have been safer. Tom's blue eyes met hers directly. You know why? I want to hear you say it, she pressed, her heart beating faster. He was quiet for a long moment. I stayed because I was concerned for your safety, he finally said. I didn't trust Hollister to let matters rest. Is that the only reason? Tom's gaze didn't waver. No, he admitted. "It's not." The simplicity of his answer and all that it implied hung in the air between them. Eleanor found herself unable to look away from his face, searching for confirmation of what she hoped he meant. "Eleanor," he began, his voice lower than usual. "What I did that day in your mother's house paying off Hollister, it wasn't entirely altruistic. I'd seen you in town before. Noticed you." A faint color touched his cheekbones. "When I heard what was happening, I couldn't stand by and let it happen." "You knew who I was?" she asked, surprised. He nodded. Hard not to notice the prettiest girl in Victor. The compliment, delivered in his straightforward manner, brought warmth to Eleanor's face. "You never said anything." "Didn't seem appropriate," he replied. "You'd been through a trauma. Offering you a job was one thing. Anything more would have been taking advantage. And now—" Eleanor's voice was barely above a whisper. Tom's expression softened. "Now I find myself caring for you in ways I hadn't expected. Hadn't thought possible again, if I'm being honest." He hesitated. "After Abigail died, I didn't think I'd ever want to risk that kind of loss again." The mention of his late wife brought Eleanor back to reality. "I understand," she said, looking down at her hands. "You still love her." "I'll always love Abigail," Tom acknowledged quietly. "She was my first love, the mother of my child. But she's been gone for 6 years, Eleanor. And these past weeks with you." He reached across the table to take her hand in his. "You've brought life back to this house, back to me." Eleanor looked up, hope mingling with uncertainty. "I don't want to replace her." "You couldn't," he said simply. "No more than anyone could replace your father in your heart. But that doesn't mean there isn't room for new love alongside the memories of those we've lost. New love." The words resonated through Eleanor like a bell, clear and true. "Is that what this is?" she asked softly. "Love?" Tom's fingers tightened around hers. "I think it could be," he said. "If you want it to be." The honesty of his response moved her deeply. No flowery declarations, no grand promises, just the simple truth of a man who had known both love and loss, offering the possibility of beginning again. "I do," Eleanor whispered. "I think I've been falling in love with you since the day you walked into my mother's house and changed my life." The smile that transformed Tom's face then was like sunshine breaking through clouds. He stood, still holding her hand, and drew her to her feet and into his arms. The embrace felt like coming home, strong and secure, yet gentle. When he lowered his head to kiss her, Eleanor met him halfway, her heart soaring with newfound joy. The kiss was tender at first, then deepened with a passion that surprised them both. When they finally pulled apart, Tom rested his forehead against hers, his breathing unsteady. "I didn't expect this," he murmured. "Not at all," Eleanor smiled. "Neither did I." "There's something you should know," he said, his expression growing serious again. "If this us is going to continue, I want to do things properly. No hiding, no sneaking around. You deserve better than that." "What are you saying?" Eleanor asked, though her heart already knew the answer. "I'm saying that if you'll have me, Eleanor Evans, I'd like to court you with the intention of making you my wife." His directness was tempered by the vulnerability in his eyes. "But only if that's what you want too." Joy bubbled up inside her, bright and effervescent. "Yes," she said simply. "That's very much what I want." His smile returned, broader than before. "Even though I'm just a simple rancher." "There's nothing simple about you, Thomas Vance," she replied with a soft laugh. "And I wouldn't want you any other way." In the days that followed, Eleanor and Tom settled into their new understanding. Outwardly, little changed. She continued her duties as housekeeper, and he ran the ranch as before. But there were new elements to their relationship. Hands that lingered when they touched, private smiles shared across the dinner table, moments stolen in the quiet of the evening when they could simply be together. Word of the attack on the ranch spread quickly throughout the county. Hollister and his surviving accomplice were held in the Victor jail awaiting trial, and public opinion was firmly against them. The story that circulated, thanks to Tom's careful account to Sheriff Miller, was that Hollister had sought revenge on Tom for some past business disagreement and had intended to abduct Eleanor as leverage. A week after the incident, Eleanor received another letter from her mother more desperate than the first, having heard rumors of what had transpired at Vance Ranch. This time, Eleanor felt compelled to respond. With Tom's encouragement, she wrote a measured reply, neither fully forgiving nor completely severing ties. Her mother had made a terrible choice in a moment of desperation, but she was still her mother. The path to reconciliation would be long and uncertain, but Eleanor was willing to take the first step. The cattle drive returned from Denver in early June, bringing news of good prices and successful sales. Daniel was surprised but approving when Tom quietly informed him of the changed relationship between himself and Eleanor. "About time you found some happiness again, boss," the foreman said with a grin. "Miss Evans is a fine woman." Summer unfolded across the ranch in waves of green that gradually gave way to the golden hues of approaching autumn. Tom and Eleanor's courtship progressed at a steady pace, each day deepening their understanding of and affection for one another. They rode together on Sundays, exploring the far reaches of the property. He taught her to shoot his rifle, impressed by her natural aptitude. She convinced him to expand the apple orchard, planting 24 new saplings that would one day yield abundant fruit. In late August, with the harvest approaching and the days beginning to shorten, Tom took Eleanor on a picnic to their favorite spot overlooking the valley. The afternoon was perfect warm sunshine, a gentle breeze, wildflowers still dotting the grass around their blanket. "I've been thinking," Tom said as they finished the meal Cookie had packed for them, "about the future." Eleanor smiled, leaning back on her elbows to gaze out at the view. "What about it? I don't see much point in waiting anymore." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. "I was in Denver last week ordering supplies. Found something I thought you might like." Eleanor sat up straight, her heart suddenly racing. "Tom," he opened the box to reveal a ring, a deep blue sapphire surrounded by small diamonds set in gold. "It reminded me of the color of the sky the day we first rode up here together," he explained. "The day I realized I was falling in love with you." Tears welled in Eleanor's eyes as Tom took her hand. "Eleanor Evans," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion evident in his face. "These past months have shown me that life can offer second chances to those willing to take them. You've brought light and laughter back into my home and my heart." He paused. "Will you marry me? Become my wife, my partner in everything?" "Yes," she whispered, then repeated more strongly, "Yes, Tom, with all my heart." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then gathered her into his arms for a kiss that promised a lifetime of love and partnership. Their wedding took place in early October, when the aspens had turned to gold and the first dusting of snow had touched the highest peaks. They were married in the small church in Victor, with Daniel serving as Tom's best man and, in a development that still surprised Eleanor, her mother in attendance. Margaret Evans had arrived in Victor 2 weeks before the wedding, chastened and uncertain of her welcome. Her reunion with Eleanor had been fraught with emotion, tears, recriminations, and finally the beginnings of forgiveness. Tom had been remarkably understanding, offering Margaret a position helping to manage the boarding house in town that he had quietly purchased as an investment. "Everyone deserves a second chance," he had told Eleanor when she expressed surprise at his generosity toward the woman who had been willing to sell her daughter. Your mother made a terrible mistake, but she loves you, and she's the only family you have left." The wedding itself was simple but joyous. Eleanor wore a gown of ivory satin ordered from Denver, with lace at the collar and cuffs that Cookie's wife had sewn by hand. Tom, standing tall and handsome in a new black suit, watched her walk down the aisle with an expression of such naked adoration that several of the ladies in attendance dabbed at their eyes. The celebration afterward was held at Vance Ranch, with tables set up in the yard and lanterns hung from the trees. Cookie outdid himself with a feast that would be talked about for months to come, and one of the ranch hands who played the fiddle provided music for dancing well into the night. As the newlyweds stood on the porch of what was now their home together, watching their guests depart under a canopy of stars, Eleanor felt a sense of completion she had never known before. "Happy, Mrs. Vance?" Tom asked, his arm around her waist. "More than I ever thought possible," she replied, leaning into his embrace. "It's strange to think that all of this began with my mother's terrible decision." "Sometimes the worst moments of our lives lead to the best," Tom observed. "If Hollister hadn't threatened your mother, if she hadn't considered his offer, I might never have had reason to step into your lives. We might have passed each other on the street in Victor for years without ever really meeting." "You believe in fate?" Eleanor asked, turning to face him. Tom considered the question seriously. "I believe that life offers opportunities and it's up to us to recognize and seize them." He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "When I walked into your mother's house that day, I wasn't looking for love. But when I saw you, the courage in your eyes, even in that terrible moment, something told me not to walk away." "I'm glad you listened," Eleanor whispered, reaching up to touch his face. Later that night, in the privacy of what was now their shared bedroom, Eleanor discovered the final piece of the happiness she had found with Thomas Vance. His tenderness as a lover matched his strength as a man, and in his arms she felt both cherished and desired, a combination that fulfilled her in ways she had never imagined possible. "I love you, Eleanor Vance," he murmured as they lay together in the quiet aftermath, "with everything I am." "And I love you," she replied, her head resting on his chest where she could hear the steady beating of his heart. "For saving me, for asking nothing in return, and for giving me everything." The years that followed brought changes to Vance Ranch. The apple orchard flourished, becoming known throughout the county for its fine fruit. The sheep Tom had envisioned proved a wise investment, their wool fetching premium prices in eastern markets. A proper road was built connecting the ranch more directly to Victor, reducing the journey to town to a comfortable half-hour ride. Most significantly, the sound of children's laughter once again filled the house. Their first child, a son they named James after Eleanor's father, was born a year after their wedding, a robust boy with his father's blue eyes and his mother's determined spirit. 2 years later came Sarah, delicate and fair like her namesake, Tom's mother. The nursery that had stood empty for so long became the heart of the home, filled with toys, books, and the endless energy of young lives. Margaret Evans became a regular visitor to the ranch, gradually rebuilding her relationship with her daughter and forming a genuine bond with her grandchildren. Though the shadow of her past actions never fully disappeared, the passage of time and her evident remorse allowed a measure of healing that Eleanor had once thought impossible. One evening, nearly 5 years after their wedding, Eleanor and Tom sat on the porch watching their children play in the yard as the sun set behind the mountains. James, now 4, was showing his little sister how to pet a new litter of kittens that had been born in the barn. "Do you ever think about how differently things might have turned out?" Eleanor asked, her hand finding Tom's as it often did in quiet moments. "Sometimes," he admitted. If I hadn't happened to overhear talk about Hollister heading to your mother's house that day. Or if you'd decided it wasn't your concern, she added. Tom squeezed her hand. That was never an option. Eleanor rested her head against his shoulder, contentment washing over her. From the moment you walked into that parlor, you changed everything for me, for my mother, even for Hollister in his own way. You changed everything for me too, Tom reminded her. This house was just a place to sleep before you came. You made it a home again. As if to punctuate his words, James came running up the porch steps, his face alight with excitement. Papa, the kittens opened their eyes. Come see, Tom laughed, rising to his feet. Well, that's important business. Coming, Eleanor. She smiled up at him, the man who had bought her freedom and given her love. Always, she replied, taking his outstretched hand. Together they joined their children in the yard, their joined lives stretching before them like the vast Colorado sky, open, bright, and full of promise.